what a sacrifice to even ask of such a man as this, an innocent, sinless one, to become sin when he knew no sin. Right now, because he was innocent, he would be innocent and sinless, he would understand how terrible sin is, and he was free from sin, and now we're saying we want that man to come and to take sin on himself and die for us. What could drive such a man to make such a sacrifice? Right? Well, we know the answer. Only love can do this. And this gives us some idea of the strength of true love. Right? I want you to think about that. The strength of true love. That he would come and take sin on himself when he knew no sin. He must love us so much. Where could such a man come from? How, when Adam's sin is passed down from father to son, from generation to generation, could such a man ever exist? Mankind was doomed and all hope was gone. In Adam, there was no hope. Right? But wait, God had already given a promise in Genesis 3:15. And now this promise of Genesis 3:15, it becomes very important to us when we ask this question, where could such a man come from? It says, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, this is talking about Satan, and between thy seed and her seed, it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Somehow, God was going to do something about sin. Genesis 3:21 is more than just an allegory or type. It is really prophecy, like Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15 says that the seed of the woman was going to come, and the seed of the woman was going to bruise Satan's head, going to defeat Satan. He was going to suffer in doing it, but he was going to succeed. And Genesis 3:21 adds to this. It becomes a prophecy. God himself will provide this man who will be the perfect sacrifice. Now, somehow, God is going to provide this man that we need, this second Adam. So mankind goes out of the garden. He takes his sin and he takes his free will. God made him with a free will, and he still has a free will. And he goes out. And he also takes a God-sized hole in his soul. And I want you to understand the truth of this matter. Every human being that ever existed has a God-sized hole in his soul, because that's how God made us. God made us to be in perfect communion with him. And so everywhere, no matter whether the gospel message has been heard or not, there is religion. People are seeking God in some way. In our Western world, we try to make a God of ourselves and to seek satisfaction that way. It never works, of course, and in our Western world, you've got every type of religion you can imagine. But everywhere you go in the world, there is religion, because every person is created with a God-sized hole in their soul. And they long to be in communion with God, right? He longs for communion with God again, and he seeks it in many ways. And we see this immediately in Cain and Abel, Genesis 4:1-5. They seek after communion with God, and so they sacrifice to God. And the clear message is that the way to God is still through the blood sacrifice. Remember, God accepts Abel's sacrifice and he rejects Cain. He says, no, your sacrifice is not the sin offering. It hasn't got the death of the substitute. It hasn't got the shed blood. And so we see that God has set the pattern. History goes on and mankind rejects God, and God sends judgment with the flood. Now remember, this is 1560 years after they're driven out of the garden. And so mankind goes on, they multiply, and they reject God, and God sends judgment with the flood. If we study the story of the flood and Noah's Ark, we learn more about this man who will come to be the saviour of the world. And we haven't gone into this yet, but as time goes on, we'll look at that more. After the flood, mankind is Noah and his family, his 3 sons and their wives and their children. They seek communion with God, and they find that the rules haven't changed. Genesis 8:20, Noah builds an altar and he offers a sin offering, right? Soon after the flood, mankind again rebels against God and decides that they will get into God's presence their own way, and so they build the Tower of Babel. Now they build it not because they really want to be in communion with God so much as the fact that they think that they can reach up to God themselves their own way. And when they try to do this, God intervenes, confusing the language and scattering the nations. And then we go on and we see that God calls Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. Now, this happens throughout history from now on. God calls a man and we look at him and say, is this the man? And then we see, no, it's not the man. So he's a man, but he's not the man. He's not the second Adam. This man is like all mankind. He's a sinner, but God says in Genesis 12:2-3, that from Adam's descendants would come the man. Right, we'll look at Genesis 12:2-3, and we'll stop just after we've looked at this. Genesis 12:2-3. Genesis 12:2-3. And verse 1, Now the Lord had said unto Abraham, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Now get this, verse 3, And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now what he's saying is, one of Adam's descendants would come who would be the man, the second Adam. How could this be? How could a descendant of a sinful man be without sin? It would take a miracle.